all of you. It is fantastic to see you in person, and what an amazing panel. I love that closing remark. May we all be ever more human, kind, and good to one another. We're in for a treat this morning. Our president of Explore Mars, J.R. Edwards, is going to sit with Dave Limp, the CEO of Blue Origin. So I want to tell you a few things about Dave Limp. He joined Blue Origin as CEO in December 2023. And of course, Blue Origin is a private space company founded by Jeff Bezos with a vision of millions of people living and working in space for the benefit of Earth. The company builds reusable rocket engines, launch vehicles, in-space systems, and lunar landers. Their model is one of my favorites and some of my students' favorites versions of the lunar landers out there. Previously, Dave was a senior vice president of Amazon Devices and Services. So if you love Alexa, Echo, Kindle, Fire TV, Fire tablets, Ring, Eero Blink, as well as other initiatives such as Project Kuiper and Zoox, you can thank Dave. Dave joined Amazon in March of 2010. But he started his career at Apple, where he held various positions from 1987 to 1996, the last of which was director of the North and South American PowerBook division. And as someone who has bought many of those over the years, again, we thank him. From 1997 to 2002, he served as executive vice president and chief strategy officer of Liberate Technologies. Following that, he served as chief strategy officer of Palm, where he was responsible for corporate development, business development, and applications. Immediately prior to joining Amazon, Dave served as venture partner of Azure Capital Partners for 4 years. He has a BS degree in computer science and mathematics from Vanderbilt University. Go Nashville, you know that's home and dear to me. And a master's of science degree in management from Stanford University Graduate School of Business. He serves as board chair for Blue Origin's Club for the Future. And if you haven't already done that, just a shout out to Blue Origin for this incredible initiative. During COVID is when I discovered that kids could draw a picture, send a message, have it flown in space. And I'll never forget getting a call from a student down in Texas named Ryland, who was like, Miss Janet, I got it back, and it is stamped and says flown in space. And so what an amazing gift to give to that future generation of explorers, that their ideas and words can travel to space, and so can they. Now he loves, in his spare time, he enjoys reading, cooking, mountain biking, and spending time with his family, and especially mobilizing all those things for the future generations that will carry out many of our space dreams. But before I bring our president, J.R. Edwards, and Dave Limp, the CEO of Blue Origin, out, here is a word from Dave's boss.
The human need to explore is deep within all of us. Our ancestors crossed mountain ranges, sailed open oceans to map new lands, and sought out the unknown, while always looking to the stars. We're curious, and now we're at a place where we can pioneer new horizons. Now is the time.
New Shepard has cleared the tower.
To open the promise of space to all.
Yes, guys, we're doing it!
And lay the way for generations to come. When our descendants look to the stars, they'll remember this time. When they reflect on where it started, they'll remember this place. And when they honor those first explorers who said, let's go, they'll remember these bold steps. We are of Blue Origin. And this
set hold fire switch to launch position
is just the beginning.
Have you ever had an idea? A seedling of an idea. A seedling of an idea that you found so compelling that was drawing you into something bigger, something greater. And you sat with this idea, and the idea sat with you. And the longer you sat with this idea, the more you were drawn and compelled. And then you embarked on a process of reflection, of contemplation, of investigation, of exploration. Perhaps it could have been an idea that was triggered by aspirations to pursue an education, leaving your homeland and traveling to a foreign country. Perhaps it was an idea that was triggered by looking at your precious children and hoping for a brighter future. Perhaps it was an idea that was triggered by seeing a loved one stricken with cancer that is spread throughout the body, and you commit yourself to exploring possible treatments and cures. Or perhaps it was the experience of caring for a loved one who has been stricken with Alzheimer's and dementia, and you keep them home to ensure that they can have an end-of-life journey that honors them. You see, for those of us who are ideators, it's that idea. It's the seedling of that idea. We can't describe it, and scientists, researchers, let's not be too cerebral about this. It's that seedling of an idea that draws us onto this path, this journey. And as you're being drawn onto this path and you yield to that process, then the voices start clicking in. The voices, the chitter-chatter, right? The naysayers, the doubters, those who don't understand. There might be some in your circle who get it. Most often will not. But yet you persevere. Why? Because at our core, we are seekers. We are seekers. We are explorers. It is that process that guides us to something even greater. Today, we're going to have a conversation. You're going to hear from the CEO of an organization of seekers, where every day they are about the business of doing the work that will serve to realize our vision for humanity. You've seen the video. Now let's have the conversation. Let's welcome to the stage Dave Limp, CEO of Blue Origin.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dave. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Oh, we are delighted. And welcome to the Explore Mars community.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we've seen this incredible video. We've heard the work. And we are just delighted to have this conversation to hear about your founder's vision and the great work you all are doing at Blue Origin. So can you tell us a little bit more about Jeff's vision?
Yeah, I've been here about a year and a half now, but Blue is over 20 years old. And even well before Amazon was a glimmer in Jeff's eye, he was thinking about his passion for space. In his valedictorian speech in high school, he talked about moving millions of people off the Earth for the benefit of Earth. And so very prescient to where we've gotten to now. We have a long way to go, but the goal here is, we as, and many of you in the audience have done this, have explored most of the solar system. We've been to most of the planetary bodies, we've been to most of the moons, or flown by them, and this planet is the best one, by far. And so we want to preserve this planet. So our mission is to build the infrastructure today to allow future generations to be able to send the polluting industries, the heavy industry off into space and preserve this beautiful blue planet we have, which is Earth, as kind of parkland and light industry, so that it's preserved for a long period of time. That doesn't take away from exploring other bodies and getting people into other places, but really the first step is to get millions of people living and working in space and those heavy polluting industries in space.
Okay, so I have heard, correct me if I've heard wrong, I've heard that it took some convincing for you when you were contemplating this move to become CEO of Blue Origin. Help us understand that conversation, what drove you to make that move, and what inspired you to continue this journey?
I've known Jeff for 18 years. I've worked for him for the last 15 at Amazon. I had no thoughts of ever running a space company. I've done consumer electronics my whole life, started at Apple and did a bunch of other things. And so when I decided to retire from Amazon, I was looking for something that I could give back a little bit, be a little bit more philanthropic in the sort of second half of my career. I didn't want to stop working, just wanted to do something different. And about that same time, Jeff was looking for a CEO. The previous CEO was retiring, and he asked me if I would do it. My instant reaction is, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm a computer scientist, and I didn't really know that much about space, other than dabbling in it, obviously with Kuiper at Amazon. But I think Jeff convinced me, he's very persuasive, that Blue didn't need another rocket scientist. We have thousands of the world's best rocket scientists. What we needed was a little bit more decisiveness, a little bit more ability to think about how do we manufacture at scale. And those are things I've done in the past. And so, by the way, and I've never looked back. I believe I have the best job in the world, so it's awesome. So,
yeah, space can be infectious, right?
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, it's so much fun.
This is the Humans to Moon and Mars Summit. So how does returning to the moon play into that longer term vision for Mars?
Yeah, our feeling is that Moon and the Mars are an and, not an or. So I think the conversation lately has been switching, back and forth between those. But we really feel like if we're going to get to Mars, the path to that is getting back to the moon, and in a permanent way. Our group inside of Blue is not called the Moon Group or the Lunar Group. It's called Lunar Permanence. It's about not developing an architecture that just goes to the moon and just lands once. We've done that, and it was heroes built that, but we want to go back and stay in the moon. There's a lot of resources on the moon. There's a lot of interesting things to learn from the moon. It's also a great stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. So for us, we're building an architecture, both a heavy launch vehicle, our HLS architecture that can get us to the moon, get us there permanently. But then, as a stepping stone, many of those elements that we're building for that lunar exploration and permanence are going to be repurposed equally as well for Mars-based missions as we move forward.
So this really is a longer-term vision, and there's an overarching sort of roadmap that's guiding your thought around how Moon, our work to take us back to the Moon, will then play into that Mars exploration.
It totally is. The first thing is you have to dramatically lower the price of getting a kilogram of mass off of the planet Earth. The Apollo mission was a remarkable thing. There's no question about it. But at its peak, it was 2% of GDP, and we're not going to get 2% of GDP anymore. And so I think through innovation of commercial companies like Blue and others, that we have the opportunity to take 2 orders of magnitude off the cost of a kilogram to the orbit or planetary body of your choice. And once we have that, then that forms the foundation, the infrastructure that we can start building on other types of things, such as lunar permanence and eventually Mars permanence too.
You talk about those funding constraints, the economic challenges. We're having a conversation in our community about vision and value, right? Discussing the visions, the different approaches, but also really appreciating the value to the nation, the value to humanity, the value to our taxpayers more immediately. But so much of this investment has come from your founder himself. So there's this very personal commitment, this personal vision that's driving the company's direction. Can you talk a little bit more about the economic benefit that you see for space exploration?
Yeah, I think Jeff has been incredibly generous to build Blue to where it is today. But probably the only question I really asked Jeff when I was talking about taking this job was, do you want Blue to be, is it a hobby or is it a business? And he had the right answer, which is it's a business, because I don't know how to run a hobby, and I don't think it's sustainable. So I think the thing about bringing commercial aspects to exploration, to science, to the moon, to the Mars, is that we have to see a business prospect for it. We have to turn it into a business. And that benefits American taxpayers, because we will use that capital as efficiently as we can to get to the moon, to get to Mars in a safe way, but in a way that's the most efficient. And the other dynamic that comes from bringing commercial companies into the space community, both from a launch perspective and a science and exploration perspective, is competition. So, I don't focus every day on the competition, but the competition does make me better, and our team's better. And so, we have a contract to go to the moon, to build a lander for the moon. SpaceX has a contract to go to the moon. I wake up every day and I want to try to do it in the fastest way possible with the lowest cost possible, and having a competitor makes us better.
We've talked a lot in our community about faster, better, cheaper, right? We're now in a period of great deal making, right? This is an era of negotiation. So as we're thinking about those efficiencies, can you talk a little bit more about some of the steps you're taking to maintain the lower cost?
Yeah, I think across the board, you want to build architectures that are first reusable. I believe the days of building launch vehicles that are disposable are behind us. It has served us well for the last 50 plus years, but you can see that rockets that are reusable can dramatically lower the price curve on getting mass to space. And so a lot of what we're doing with New Glenn, our heavy launch vehicle, is about building reusability into that rocket. The BE-4 engines are reusable. They have a long life. The rocket itself, the booster, will land in its architecture, and that has reusability. But then once you're into space, we also want to look to reusability. So the lunar vehicle that we're building, our Mark II vehicle, which will land on the moon under the HLS contract, it's also built to be reusable. So it loiters in lunar orbit and can sit out there and get refueled, and it can run through multiple missions. It's not meant to land on the moon and just stay on the moon. It's meant to be reused. And then similarly, we have a deep exploration vehicle, which we call Blue Ring, which dramatically changes the cost curve of building both science, commercial, and defense applications for deep space. So we could all agree that sending missions to Mars or missions out to the asteroid belts, those have been expensive. They've been bespoke missions. But with Blue Ring, we can actually send a mission to Mars every 6 months with a lot of payload on it, and both upgrade the infrastructure to Mars, around Mars, communications at all, but also we can send science payloads to there. And so it's a different way of thinking about reusability even when it comes to science and exploration.
I'm loving this, how we're thinking differently about the architecture, about the past. Let's talk the tech. So to continue along that thread, how is your work on the zero boil-off coming along?
It's coming along really well. We've demonstrated both 90 and 20K in the lab. We have our first, so I think everybody knows, so I'll just back up a second, which is there's very little debate that for in-space propulsion, that hydrogen and oxygen are the best fuel oxidizer. I'm sure somebody would want to debate me, but I'll hold firm. It has high ISP.
There might be a few in the audience.
There might be. I'm willing to take on that debate, but it has an engine developed on that. We have 2 engines with that fuel and oxidizer, our BE-3U, as well as our BE-7 engines. They have high ISP. They have a fuel and oxidizer that we can actually get on the moon. So we know the water's there. So with that water, we can produce those 2 things. So it's great in-space fuel and oxidizer. It has one problem, which is boil-off. It's a cryogenic system, and therefore, if you don't have a way to solve that problem, and so far it hasn't been solved, you have trouble keeping the storability of those propellants in space. So we've been working really hard with NASA, actually, on our cryogenic cooler, which has the ability to, in space, make that fuel and that oxidizer kind of permanent in orbit. And our transporter architecture gets refueled in LEO, and then it can go out to lunar, and it can loiter out in lunar or in Mars in the future. The same transporter will have the ability. It can take 100 tons of fuel to lunar orbit. It can take 30 tons of fuel and propellant to Mars orbit, and we can loiter there because we're able to sustainably preserve 20 Kelvin and 90 Kelvin. And that's demonstrated in the lab. We have our first prototype cryocooler that's coming online in the next couple months, and I'm very optimistic that this is going to be a solved problem in the next year or two.
Well, we'll be watching that
Yeah,
with great enthusiasm.
It's a very big deal. Yeah.
Now back to New Shepard. So why bother with a suborbital rocket? I mean, what's the goal there?
Well, first of all, it's a good business. I think there's not a lot of opportunities for humans to get above the Kármán line. And so far we've flown 52 astronauts. We'll be flying 6 more on Saturday if everything goes nominally. And I think that there is a insatiable demand out there for human beings that grew up thinking about space and want to get to space, but it's still very hard to do right now. And so being able to have that experience, they come back changed in a lot of ways. And so I really feel like the business opportunity there is a good one, and I've met most of the astronauts that have flown. They've come back changed people. They really do feel. That aside, even if it wasn't a good business, we would still fly New Shepard, because it is such a good test bed for a lot of other types of things. So well before we flew New Glenn, which was the first commercial rocket to ever reach orbit on its first try, we flew all the avionics that flew on New Glenn, 100% of the avionics on New Shepard, and basically ran through the ascent and descent stage of that mission. So we had a very good test bed to understand the dynamics of what those avionics were going to look like well before we flew. So we had more confidence that flying the first time we'd have a shot at getting to orbit. Similarly, we'll fly our Mark I lunar lander later this year to land on the moon, largest vehicle to ever land on the moon. The LiDAR system that runs the landing for that, terrain guidance and terrain landing, has already been flown on New Shepard 2. So as we've come down and landed, we've used the same LiDAR system to, again, flush out that and make sure we have a great test bed. So New Shepard also serves a great test bed for us as well.
Proving the tech, reducing the risks, so it's all about that risk mitigation. That seems to be the guiding philosophy to ensuring success.
Yeah, I think we're a kind of a balance. I don't think we want to reinvent traditional aerospace. We want to go faster. We want to be more decisive. We want to do it in a more cost-effective way. And you can't use the traditional aerospace playbook and do all those things. That being said, we're also not going to just, fly things for the sake of flying them. We want to make sure that if we can test it on the ground and we can be safer on the ground, we're going to test it and be safer on the ground for sure.
I sort of came on the scene during the shuttle era, so I recall the many times visiting KSC and seeing that area, and then after not being there for a few years, I returned to KSC and saw a sea of blue buildings. And I thought visually, okay, the landscape has changed. So first, let me pause just to celebrate the vision and the accomplishment. I mean, as we look across what has been regarded as new space, which humbly submitted, it's now become space because you are driving a lot of this work forward. One cannot discount the accomplishments and the achievements. So kudos to your founder and to the entire team for what you've accomplished.
It is thousands of people working. If you saw those factories, building big rockets takes big factories, and it's thousands of technicians and thousands of welders that build these every day. We're running 24/7 at our rocket factory in Florida, where you said at KSC. We have an engine factory in Huntsville where we're rolling out, more than an engine every week now coming off the line. And so it's a sight to behold. And we're just getting started. I think the rate of manufacturing and the rate of launches is only going to go up from here. If there's one thing I'm worried about down at the Cape, is that our infrastructure is not quite ready yet for, let alone what SpaceX is doing every day, which is amazing, but also what we're going to be doing over the next couple of years. The pace of launches and the amount of capability that commercial entities are going to bring on board is just going to revolutionize what space looks like.
And that's not something that can necessarily be addressed solely from the commercial community, right? I mean, that warrants involvement from all stakeholders, from the government, from private sector, even from the international partners. So can we sort of shift now to the international topic? How important is it for the U.S. to get back to the moon first and onto Mars? Well,
I think that, as an American, I don't want another Sputnik moment. I think that so from my standpoint, getting boots on the moon and setting the groundwork for permanence on the moon is of national importance and urgency. And I can rest assured, Blue will do everything in its power to try to make that happen but in a cost-effective way. So we're committed to that, no matter what the architecture looks like, but it does take the U.S. government and international governments to have the motivation to do it. There's not yet a commercial reason only to go to the moon with humans. There's lots of commercial reasons to put robotics on the moon and other types of things. So we do need to have conviction that the moon is important and Mars is important as well. But we certainly have that. And then international coalitions are really important too, because I think, as you think about how this eventually gets funded, it's likely taxpayers around the world that want to do this, then you want to bring in other partners. And so we have a cargo version of our Mark II lunar lander, and we're working with the Italian Habitat, multi-purpose habitat, to be able to launch that. And that would, again, build permanence on the moon. It's not being built for a one-time visit. It's being built for repeated visits. And so bringing those international partners together is critically important to making this vision of the moon, and then using the moon as a stepping stone to get to Mars as well.
I'm reminded of the recent visit, the presidential visit to the Middle East region, and the announcement of the major partnership with the United Arab Emirates. So that's even being encouraged on a national level, how we're thinking about our engagement with international partners around the world. Let's talk more about the tech. Let's talk AI. So AI in your infrastructure and design is how would that impact exploration? What is the role of AI?
Yeah, there's no world, there's no fundamental place in our world that is not going to be dramatically affected by AI. I had a front row seat to this for my last 14 years at Amazon. We are in a golden age of computer science. And every day you wake up, more magic is happening with what AI can actually do. I was with my kids yesterday, and I have teenagers, and they literally use OpenAI as a therapist. And by the way, it's a good therapist too. And so it's pretty amazing. And so it is going to redefine everything. And space is not immune. If anything, I think space and aerospace will be dramatically impacted. A few places around this, it's helping us with our CAD-based designs. So when you think about structural loads and those types of things, how can AI help you reinvent what a rocket looks like? And so we're thinking about those types of things. Robotics. There's going to be places we want to send human beings. There's going to be places we do not want to send human beings. But the advancements in AI-based robotics that are happening every single day are mind-blowing. And what you thought was impossible in robotics a couple years ago is now or it would, quoting the old Asimov quote, that it would seem like magic. It's actually a reality right now about what these robotics will do. So we're using it. We're building lunar rovers. We have a whole line of different lunar rovers, one which will fly on one of Firefly's future lunar missions. But there's a hard problem there, which is there's not a lot of data from the moon. So if you train an autonomous car, you train it on data and you drive a lot of cars around and you simulate a lot of that. But there's really only a minute or two of footage from the moon back in the Apollo era, and it is not high resolution. So trying to train on that data is impossible. It's just not enough. But the modern version of autonomous AI and these multimodal models mean that we can build simulations and autonomous driving software for rovers that you would never have thought of a couple years ago. And it just instantly is kind of happening. So there's not going to be a place where AI does not dramatically affect our industry.
So AI is not to be feared then, it's actually to be embraced. You can harness the power of AI to drive these missions forward. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I am an optimist, and I'm sure that there's some Monte Carlo simulation that says we're going to end up with Terminator, but but the fact of the matter is that it is going to do so much good for society. Is my opinion. You see it already. I'm involved with a company that does drug discovery, and they were just talking about the state of what medicine is going to look like on Mars. I'm more optimistic. They were optimistic. I'm even more optimistic than the previous panel because AI is going to be a world-class physician's helper. Yeah, and so its ability to recognize new drug compounds, or with a multimodal model through a camera to identify exactly what is that mole that's on your arm and is it cancerous. It's already state of the art, and we're just beginning. So the optimistic view of AI is that we're going to live longer better, and we're going to have more free time to do joyful things because some of the more tedious tasks of what we're asking ourselves and others to do right now will be able to be done through robotics and through the AI themselves.
And earlier in our conversation, you mentioned there's a role for commercial industry, there's a role for government, there's a role for international partners. What can the government do to help advance and accelerate the development of these technologies, to advance and accelerate our journey back to the moon and then on to Mars?
Yeah, there's the obvious answer, which is funding. That this doesn't come for free, and especially when you start talking about humans and those kinds of things, it's more expensive. If you were to, we put weather satellites up, but we don't fly them with a weather person on it. There's nobody on it because you don't need the ECLIS system to support a human being to get your weather satellite to work. But there's a lot of benefit to having humans, including national prestige. But getting to the moon also is about, we kind of hinted at it earlier, staking out some of the key resources on the moon. We know that there are eternal points of light that are incredibly important. We know in the South Pole and likely in the North Pole that there's water. And I already talked about hydrogen and oxygen being critical sources of fuel. We know we have a research project internally where we're taking regolith and producing silica for silicon salts. So getting up there, building factories on the moon is a great step. And the government can really help with research dollars around that. But it still does need the labs. The science missions need the JPLs of the world to make the human experience right. We need the Johnson Space Centers of the world to be able to kind of use that gold mine of institutional knowledge. But I would say that and so it might be a little provocative, which is let's have those smart brains look on the forward-thinking types of things, the really edge of the science, planning the really exotic missions, figuring out how to get to planetary bodies we haven't gotten to before and staying there. And I think commercial folks can worry about the infrastructure. We can do the launch. We can build the satellite buses that can get you to Mars much more frequently, that don't cost billions of dollars. We can take a zero and over time maybe 2 zeros off of that. And if the government around the world leaves that to the commercial side, then there's a lot more resources that are freed up for the science side, for the national prestige side, and those types of things.
The landscape and interest in space has changed. Would you agree? And how do we harness this renewed interest in space? Earlier this year, we heard from the president during the inaugural address, the national commitment to put boots on Mars. How do we leverage this moment to make progress?
Well, I think that there are billions of dollars going into the HLS system, and by the way, we're the recipient of some of that. Others are, SpaceX is, and those are. I can speak for our architecture. Our architecture is, fly a lander to the moon, meet up with a capsule at the moon, refuel the lander, and bring it down. That takes a heavy lift rocket, which we're building. That takes a transporter, which we are building, that can, like I said, can take 100 tons of fuel to lunar orbit. That takes a lander, which we are building. Now, it turns out that if you look at those architectures and then lift and shift them to Mars, it's not 100% reuse, but it's about 80% reuse. All the engine development, all the cryocooler development, all the core vehicle development. The lander does change a bit. That's why I leave 20% out there. But it's completely repurposed. And I won't speak for SpaceX, but I'm guessing that they have a similar story, which is that if we want to get to Mars efficiently and not spend multiple percentage points of GDP down the road, what you want to do is repurpose all those tax dollars that are going into our lunar architecture and lift and shift them to Mars. And so I would ask that we think about those types of things and how can we reuse these types of things. I would also say that our deep space infrastructure is aging. And that's not a fault of anyone. I think there have been very many well-purposed people that have been pointing this out for years. But when you think about how we're going to be permanently on the moon and medium and long term permanently on Mars, but at least exploring Mars in the near term, you do not want to go to these places without great infrastructure in place. And that means communications infrastructure, observation infrastructure, and so I would also, maybe slightly provocatively say that we want to make sure we're putting some of the resources towards an efficient way, a cost-effective way for upgrading our infrastructure around the moon, around Mars, and in between, to be able to have, I want it to feel like the fiber I have in my house. That's what we owe the astronauts that are going to land on the moon. Eventually, the astronauts that are going to land on Mars is great communications, great infrastructure, because that paves the way for permanence.
To accomplish all of this really warrants an innovative mindset, right? So when you're considering talent, what are you looking for in your workforce? And how do you foster a culture that nurtures that innovative spirit?
Yeah, we have, like I said, thousands of, I think, the best inventors in the world as it comes to aerospace, but it is really hard to find them. You came from Purdue; that's a great place to get great talent. But if I look at the number of talented engineers that are entering into the aerospace field, it's just not enough. And also, and will AI help some? Yes, it will help some, but it's not going to propel the winds as strongly as we want them. So we first of all, we obviously try to make Blue a great place to work, a great place to invent, and try to recruit from the best and brightest. But secondarily, I think she mentioned it when we started, we have a non-for-profit called Club for the Future that is about fostering STEM education. it's again, a lot of our vision at Blue is very long-term vision. It's not, I am not going to see the fruition of our efforts. It's a generation after me or a generation after that that's going to see it. But we just like we're planting the seeds for lowering the cost of launch and building infrastructure in space, we also want to plant the seeds for how do we get the next generation of leaders and inventors and builders out of our school system. And so we send thousands of ambassadors out every year to grade schools and middle schools to try to inspire folks to be able to embrace STEM, but specifically also aerospace kinds of education. And I've already started seeing the fruition of that. I don't think a week goes by I don't get an inspiring letter from a young person that was impacted by either one of our launches or a visit by a Blue ambassador, and that they chose to go to a college or a technical degree. And that's the best thing that we can do.
So for those young people, Dave, so let's say a young person reaches out to Blue and says, I have this burning desire to explore.
Yeah.
What advice might you offer to those young people who are considering pathways and careers in tech?
Yeah, I think get involved in something that is in and around what you are with passion. If you're a computer science person, then start writing software for robotics. We find the best leaders that come into Blue through either through an internship or a permanent job. We're at college. I'm talking about the sort of technical leaders. Went to college and they got involved in maybe the aerospace club, or they got involved in the automotive club where they're building small go-kart racers or those types of things, or the robotics club. That practical knowledge combined with the sort of pedagogy of the education that they're getting is a great intersection that gives you the practical experience to build the things we're building, because we are building real tactical things, but also the theoretical experience. Similarly, and I think it's another area we have to continue to work on as a nation, is we have thousands of people that are in the factories building these, and our vocational education system has also languished. And so I could use every good welder I can get. And there are great welders out there, but we're not teaching enough people to be great welders. We're not teaching enough people to be great manufacturing engineers on how they build things in the factory. And so we're doing a lot of work in where we are in Florida and Alabama, where our factories are, and also up in Washington, to foster vocational education as well, because I think these are great jobs. They pay really well. You can build a career on this, and I look forward to working on both sides of that equation.
Dave, thank you so much. There's so much more, so many questions that our community want to ask. This has been such a delightful conversation. Again, congratulations. Congratulations to you, to Jeff, the entire team. We are excited to see the accomplishments ahead. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing more about your journey.
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.